had just resoundingly been registered in the congressional elections. Early in 1994, Newt Gingrich testified before the House Ways and Means Committee. Listen to what he said about the plan to expand GATT's powers. Quote, "We need to be honest about the fact that we are transferring from the United States significant authority to a new organization. This is a transformational moment. This is not just another trade agreement. This is a very big transfer of power." End quote. This assessment of what was planned for GATT is absolutely correct. It's why the Council on Foreign Relations wanted the United States to submit to the trade bloc's regulatory powers. GATT has established a gigantic bureaucracy called the World Trade Organization, which is now the sole interpreter of 20,000 pages of trade regulations for 120 nations. This WTO essentially has life and death authority over America's economic interests. But the Constitution grants power to Congress and to Congress alone to regulate commerce with foreign nations. And Congress has no authority to delegate its powers to any other body. But with Newt Gingrich leading the way, GATT and its World Trade Organization have been given this power. We have also learned that GATT will meddle in such matters as reducing the amount of money U.S. citizens can put aside for pensions. A headline from the December 5th, 1994 Wall Street Journal, the establishment newspaper that openly urged Congress to approve the GATT Accord. The headline reads, "GATT law to reduce amount Americans can save for pensions." What are we to think when Newt Gingrich, the supposed alternative to a revolutionary Bill Clinton, joins the president in New Hampshire in June of 1995 for a love feast debate where not one of Mr. Clinton's many deficiencies were aired? Instead of using the nationally televised opportunity to point out the harmful policies being offered by the president and the reforms America really needs, Gingrich told the audience in Claremont, New Hampshire, that he was a big fan of Franklin Roosevelt and a big fan of Woodrow Wilson. This is an alternative to Bill Clinton? In March 1995, Gingrich gave a speech at the Nixon Center for Peace and Security. After praising himself for his role in the NAFTA and GATT measures, getting them through Congress, he told his audience that the United States must lead all over the world. His remarks caused The Economist to feature him in an article entitled "The Internationalists." But he's not supposed to be an internationalist. He's supposed to be a defender of the independence of the United States. Hardly a day goes by without some attack in the media complaining about isolationism. And this is exactly the topic that the British article addressed in its revealing portrait of Gingrich. Here's what it said. If Mr. Clinton and Gingrich, as good internationalists, want to keep this isolation in check, they have work to do in their own parties. Strange as it may seem in these days of loud contrast politics, on this issue they are actually on the same side. On January 20th, 1995, Secretary of State Warren Christopher delivered a foreign policy speech at Harvard University. After the speech, Christopher, who went from vice chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations into the Clinton cabinet, was asked by a television reporter for his assessment of Newt Gingrich. His one-word answer, given with a wry smile, was internationalist. There are few who would know better than Warren Christopher the full meaning of that one-word description. But haven't traditional-minded Americans been told repeatedly that Gingrich is their champion? That he will always put America first, that he is a tough, no-nonsense American, that he will lead the revolution against big government. Sad to say, the facts speak otherwise again and again. The CFR membership of Speaker Gingrich places him alongside President Clinton, Secretary of State Christopher, and over 500 other U.S. government officials who share membership in this seat of internationalist establishment power. In July 1995, the New York Times featured Gingrich in a front-page article whose headline labeled him a foreign policy novice. But the Times delighted in pointing out that Gingrich's favorite foreign policy mentor is Henry Kissinger. It claimed that Kissinger is doing a good job schooling the speaker. Kissinger, the architect of much of America's disastrous foreign policy over recent years, is another member of the Council on Foreign Relations. It certainly follows that he is a huge promoter of international trade entanglements such as NAFTA and GATT, both backed by Newt Gingrich. Also in July 1995, Gingrich gave a speech at the Center for Strategic and International Affairs. In it he said, quote, "The American challenge in leading the world is compounded by our Constitution," end quote. He suggested that we would have to rethink our Constitution. He also told his audience, "I believe in a very strong central government. You can have a very strong but limited federal government." No, you can't. The founders wanted the central government weak, not strong. It was to be tied down to merely protecting rights. In April 1996, President Clinton signed the new federal budget. While doing so, he repeatedly thanked congressional leaders, Speaker Gingrich and Senate Majority Leader Dole, for backing down and not scrapping an array of government programs that should be scrapped. He went out of his way to heap praise on these Republicans. He said he was pleased that Congress restored the programs, followed his urging regarding others, and adopted recommendations for some more. These programs, all of which were supposed to be terminated according to Gingrich, include oppressive environmental laws, the National Service Program, the United Nations-inspired Goals 2000 program for America's schools, federal financing of local police, and UN peacekeeping missions for our nation's military. A very astute observer of American politics recently summarized the difficult situation facing good congressmen who seek re-election in 1996. Gingrich has achieved something almost unthinkable. He has kept Republican freshmen from being conservative and yet set them up for possible defeat in November for being too conservative. That takes brilliance. Early in 1996, freshman Republican Congressman John Hostetler of Indiana wrote a letter to Gingrich and released it to the press. It said, "I am today declining your unsolicited offer to attend a fundraiser in southwestern Indiana to benefit my re-election." Hostetler felt he was better off getting ready for re-election on his own than having Gingrich by his side. And that attitude has spread amongst the very best of the Republicans in the House. Not only did Gingrich use his brilliance to keep Republican freshmen from being conservative, some of the best Republican conservatives turned down his support for their re-election. In the revealing case of Dr. Ron Paul, who in 1996 sought to regain a seat in Congress after having a decade of not serving, Newt Gingrich did everything possible to keep him from returning to Washington. Gingrich went out of his way to get 50 members of Congress to endorse Dr. Paul's opponent in the Texas primary. Even former President George H.W. Bush campaigned for Dr. Paul's opponent at Gingrich's request. Despite all of Gingrich's efforts, Dr. Paul did win the primary and the election and did return to Congress. Why would the supposed leader of the conservative movement work to keep one of the Constitution's most stalwart defenders away from Washington, D.C.? The answer is that Gingrich is one of many who want to be known as a conservative, an undefined and shifting attitude. Many so-called conservatives today don't care to be reminded that there really is a Constitution that limits government power. Dr. Paul is more a constitutionalist than a conservative. Congressmen who do care about the Constitution have been complaining about being called on the carpet by Gingrich for disloyalty. Disloyalty to what? Not to the Constitution, but to the party and to the leadership of the party. Was the Constitution ever mentioned? Not on your life. Americans have been talked out of the Constitution and its limitations on government power. Repeatedly, we are expected to make judgments based on someone being labeled either conservative or liberal, terms that are not defined. Today, a man with a record like Gingrich's can be described as a conservative.